Welcome back, everybody. Throughout the month of June, we are celebrating Pride Month. And this morning, we're remembering a woman who is known for being an early advocate for gay rights and the transgender community. Marsha P. Johnson, often identified as one of the prominent figures of the Stonewall riots back in '69, which of course then sparked the gay liberation movement in America. Her life has been celebrated in numerous books, films, and documentaries. Joining Morning Rush right now is Oscar-nominated filmmaker David France, writer and director of the documentary called The Death and Life of Marsha P. Johnson. Thanks so much for being with us. We really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
What I really like about this is that you knew her personally. So you come at this with a different perspective because you knew Marsha. Talk about that first, the relationship and what inspired you to make the film.
Well, you know, I first moved to New York in 1981. I moved on Gay Pride Month in '81 and was almost immediately greeted by Marsha Johnson. She was like the spirit of LGBTQ New York and the kind of welcoming figure. If Marsha deemed you welcomable, she gave you a home in New York, and she gave me that home. She died just a decade after that, and I felt obliged to try to keep her spirit alive during that time.
And talk about her role in, of course, the incredibly famous and pivotal Stonewall riot. I know there are conflicting stories. We know she was on the front lines somehow, but what do we know what she did that night that really, no exaggeration, did spark a revolution?
There's so much mythology around Stonewall, as you know, I'm sure. There were no cameras there. Not until the next night do we even have photographs. So it's so much about what happened there is left to the imagination and to those who claim it. Certainly, it has been said that Marsha was present inside the bar and threw the first projectile that touched off the riots and the rebellion of that day and that weekend. But she actually says that she didn't get there until later, until about 2 o'clock in the morning. We know from witnesses that she played a pivotal role, certainly during combat with the police, which was so essential at that time because, as we know, the police were engaged in a decades-long campaign against the community, closing down and harassing any gathering establishment that might be doing business with the LGBTQ community and arresting people, especially people like Marsha, who tended to dress as the opposite gender. There was a law in New York at the time on the books that said it was a crime if you were not wearing at least 5 items of clothing that were assigned to your gender, your born gender. And so there she was on the front lines doing that, but she was also helping those who were injured, and that's some of the most touching commentary that we hear from that night is how she moved people out of the line of fire, how she tended to people's injuries, and then got them riled up enough to go back and do more battle.
And she lived most of her life without a permanent home. And I'm wondering if that's what led her to then found a group home for transgender youth, also living on the street. Talk about that part of her legacy.
She was living on the street, and so many young trans folks were at that time. It was not typical to be able to find employment if you were trans-identified or trans-appearing, as she was, nor to find even adequate housing. And she was part of a movement that resided outdoors, that made a kind of a cultural declaration about that. She was a street person, as she called herself, and she gathered together a large community of like-minded people, many of them trans, many of them forced to work in the sex industries. And then in the early 70s, right after the Stonewall Rebellion, she became one of the few people who began meeting in the months after the smoke cleared to create the foundations for the LGBTQ movement, the modern movement. And one of those pillars that she recognized was going to be important was to support the transgender youth. And she started with her colleague, Sylvia Rivera, the first trans rights organization ever in the world that we know of. And they did get a lease on an old building on the Lower East Side of New York, and there created the first safe haven for kids who needed protection, who needed help. And she was kind of the mother of that house, and created, with Sylvia, created really the idea, the intellectual concept that gender and gender identity was something that was mutable and could be defended and should be defended within the movement and within the community.
Such a fascinating and influential life. David France, writer and director of the documentary The Death and Life of Marsha P. Johnson. Thanks so much for being with us today
Happy Pride.
and for your work. Thank you. We'll be right back with more after this.